Welcome back. We're back again. This time we're going to talk about the Selmer Mark 6, Mark 7, and SuperAction 80 from a designer and essayist, Gerard Badini. This is a 1912 article, July 3rd, 1912, from the French website I've been doing these articles from. Let's get right to it. So here we go, July 3rd, 2012, Mark 6, Mark 7, SuperAction 80, Selmer. Interview of a designer and essayist, Gerard Badini. This was translated from French to English using the Translate Google website. I guess here's a picture of Badini. That would have been 11 years ago now. Wow. I remember when this article first came out, it was emailed to me. Couldn't read it. Funny. By Jose Daniel Torod and Rene Perret. Jose Daniel's done a couple other articles I know I've read about it. I believe I've read it a lot from Perret also. And like any of these articles, you're getting different perspectives from different people about history of certain things, or the clarinet saxophones, or the buffets, or Selmer Paris, or in this case, 6, 7, SuperAction 80. So it's always good to get different perspectives. Okay, so jumping to this article now, they want to fix elements or fixed perspectives or known information about the history of saxophone and jazz. Development of Selmer saxophones from the 50s and 80s, Mark 6, 7, and SuperAction 80. Are they made for jazz? What were their choice? Remember, the Selmer House closely linked to their saxophone. Adolphe Sax invented the saxophone in 1840, and the Selmer Company, which had been making saxophones since 1921, took over the sax workshops in 1928. So GB, in this case, GB is Gerard Badini. Gerard says he first played a Mark 6 saxophone, and he knew Patrick Selmer. Discussions on sax techniques were specific with him. Let's see what else is in here. You can also read this. I'll give the link for this article in the description here. The two Selmer brothers who founded the company were clarinetists and lived in the USA. Alexander was a clarinetist in Boston, New York Philharmonic, developed high-end American clientele. I have a lot of information about Alexander. I have a page of him on my website. He actually made some brochures. There's one that's, I remember in particular in orange, that had a lot of information in it. He developed high-end American clientele, the essential place for clarinets, then of saxophone and jazz before the Second World War, education and music. When he lived in the USA, he knew Selmer positioned him and knew other saxophonists and French saxophonists. His friend was Stan Getz. Well, that's interesting. Who also played Mark 6, won another Selmer sax during the visit to Paris. He asked George Selmer, president of the house, that he and Badini try out a saxophone, which he did. And then Patrick Selmer asked him to be an official tester. Cool. At the same time as Michel Naval, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, soloist of the Republican Guard. And then here we have the pinky cluster of it's an SBA or BA. That's before the tilting B flat mechanism. And if you notice the posts behind it, this is the one where the posts where each of them had their own separate location for where the pivot was. So each of the rods were a different length. And you can see the heads for the rods behind it. See, so there's one here, 2, 3, 4. So this is either SBA or BA. I can't quite remember them off the top of my head. Balanced action. There's the answer right there. Balanced action, 36 to 47 left-hand spatulas and octave key details. So the super balanced action, I think they leveled these out a little bit more. And I had a balanced action before and an SBA. I wish I kept the SBA. I really love the SBAs. So RP, since the arrival of the BeBop, the king saxophones was Mark 6, and the greatest played with it. For which saxophones are preferred by jazz musicians before the famous Mark 6. GB, 1940s, most play the balanced action model. The mid-50s, they went to the fairer, lighter, and would be the benchmark for the jazz musicians, the Mark 6. What were the main reasons of the success of the Mark 6? Let's see. He answers. See, he says at the time they gradually moved from artisanal production to the industrial assembly line production. This would be the same way as the evolution of adding, going from steam belt-driven manufacturing, a lot of hand manufacturing, belt-driven manufacturing, adding electricity, getting electrical machines going, and the clarinet industry really had an evolution through that time frame itself. And if you read their article I did just earlier about the history of buffet, of them using the keywork as a jig of determining where they're going to cut the tone holes, that was quite enlightening. Okay, so he didn't really believe different quality depending upon the numbers. There's always good and less good ones. A lot of things I found about variation of saxophones is the diameter of the body pip really plays a big difference in the way the instrument responds, especially how it can handle different variations of mouthpieces and its tonal quality and depth and breadth of sound. And I've done actually experiments of that before. The main competitors of the six was King and also Kahn. Let's see. In France, Donnet brand had mixed success in the 1950s. Buffet Crampon, with his impeccable finish and reputation. His teacher, Michel Defaye. But the six remained the sax of choice for Jasmine. Really, the six, the keywork was really just so much better than Buffet's keywork. I don't like their sax keywork at all. And I don't like King and Kahn keywork at all either. Down here, if you look at this, this is a tilting B flat mechanism, so you know this is a six. And you notice the posts with the ball ends for the key rods, those are all in line now from the balance action one beforehand. Mark 6. JDT played on Mark 6s. Dexter Gordon, Phil Woods. Phil Woods went on to play Yamaha also, didn't he? The 875 Yamaha, I think, is the original 875. I had one for a short time. I unfortunately couldn't keep it, but wasn't quite a six, but it was the key work just fit my hand just a little bit better. Key work is a little bit smoother. It was a great horn. I still want to buy one just to have it sit on the shelf and do nothing. Phil Woods, Sonny Stitt, Johnny Griffin, Benny Carter, Lee Konitz, hundreds of other players. Talks about how they're basically they come out really high end products. No instrument is the same or has the same qualities. This is true. There's a lot of little variations. I mean, just the height of the pad to the tone hole can cause a lot of variations. And using different plastic resonators, flat ones, conical ones, metal resonators, those can all change because it helps reflect the higher partials or lower partials, the whole thing. And here they go on that they agree on the adjustment of the springs, capping of the pads, ergonomic position of the keys, varnish, ease of mission, aesthetic aspect, all plays a role into it. And their mechanical problems to be solved. See, this is the key work that I do not like. Can't stand the really wide table keys and the way they're more clunky. Question about it is testing. Says he arrived at Selmer in 1979. He was playing the 7 already. When playtesting, play a medium C, middle C basically, to see what the general sound was like. That's what we do in playtesting too. The saxophones, clarinets, finding, make sure it was a nice tone, nice in tune. Then he says he does the chromatic scale, which is what you want to do to make sure each note plays fully and is in tune. Very open bass. Basically, the bass comes out easy. The treble is usually fairly good. Ever hear a warble, in low B flat? You could have a small leak up on the palm keys. And you want to play each and every note. You listen to it, make sure the tone is a full tone, easy acquisition of the tone, just pops the way you want it to. If there's any type of delay, there could be a small leak. Check the lift of the keys, checking the force of the springs, basically, make sure everything's aligned. Like the Mexican cons are known for rods that aren't straight and they get binded and everything. That's an example of a low quality instrument. So a lot more information here. Saxophone valid for one ear is the other. Testing with Michael Noax. Richards to timber and stuff. Let's see what else. You always play with the same 9-star Autolink mouthpiece and a medium reed. I just did the video about the Autolink mouthpieces. Now, when you have a wide open mouthpiece, the body pip, if it's really small, just slightly undersized, you can have some nice response, nice smooth tone. And if it's too big, it can affect your reed. If you have too soft of a reed, the reed will slap and you'll get a squeak. This is the classical saxophonist colleagues. They do the same, but they're never together as a tester, looking for different ways, the way the instrument responded and everything, I guess. And they took their criticisms and tried to adjust their production. This is key work. The key work like this, I can actually play really well. The Cowworth key work was similar to this. And also the SBA and BA. This was what, King? Yeah. This was King. But I've always found the US keywork more clunky. Never really liked it that much. The CRP can describe the manufacturing process of the 7 and the technical points it had. What are the main differences between the two Mark 6s and 7s? And why the new model? So this should be interesting. The Mark 6 includes improvements. First, a new octave key mechanism. Then a group of left-hand little finger spatulas, but big spatulas, allowing for more flexible passage across the entire platter. The Mark 6 had this problem of getting the bass out with the little finger. He had to be muscled. The Mark 7 sax is often criticized for its too heavy left-hand bass platter, as it is true that bass handling is complex. The keys are longer to improve the grip of the instrument with particular ergonomics. The ring body pavilion evolves towards a ring with 3 anchoring points. So that's the body brace he's talking about there. We also note the return of the plastic resonator and the buffers, which allow better sealing. As an instrument, and that's better sealing of the resonator onto the pad. Sometimes metal resonators, especially flat ones, they'll get loose on the pad, and then they'll start jiggling like a cymbal in there. We also know the return to plastic resonator buffers allow better sealing as an instrument in tune with its time with a powerful sound rich in high harmonics, corresponding to the needs of the moment and the advent of rock pop providing music with warm and powerful sound. Only alto and tenor saxes were born. There's no soprano or baritone 7, but these prototypes will serve as the basis of the versions of SuperAction 80. I have an early version SuperAction 80 soprano. Absolutely love it. And truthfully, I do like the smaller table keys. I bought my SuperAction 80s. My alto was my first pro horn. I bought it in 1982, I think, ready out of production. They had 6s, late 6s. People didn't like the last version of the 6s, the 1974 models. People didn't like them. They had those, I remember the left-hand side keys had those weird rocker arms that made a lot of noise. Matter of fact, my 6 is a late 70s model. And that's why I know about that. See, the 7 is equipped with a new shape of the high F sharp and the oval side F sharp key, which has the long pearl on it versus a round pearl. They thought the 7 was going to replace even its quality as the Mark 6 and its competitors, but the expected success was more timid, many jazz men preferring their old sax. I was told that one of the problems with the 7 tenors was that there was a quality control with the body pip. I remember playing some 7s where the mouthpieces wouldn't play well. You'd use a large chip mouthpiece and soft reed. You go with the transition of the body pip. The body pip diameter is too big. You lose pressure, and the reed vibrates with some back pressure. When the back pressure is lost, it slaps against the mouthpiece. You get a squeak. Easily resolvable if you know what you're doing. And I actually tested this in the past, and my 7 actually is a real nice 7. It has gold-plated neck and is really nice. But I remember playing other 7s where it had that mouthpiece problem. At that time when I was playing some, I never knew what the issue was until I actually bought one and started experimenting with it. And here's a picture of the 7 table keys. I actually have videos of 6 versus 7 technical details. I'll post those at the end. If you really want to know a lot of details of the 6 versus the 7, it's there. When you say the 7 is a lot heavier, I actually go over why the weight variance. You can identify where the extra weight is on a 7. The ribbing being wider, bigger keys, more posts, it all just kind of adds up. Mark 7 neck. So people prefer the 6s. I can understand that. I have a 6.2. It's the key work I like. Matter of fact, if you gave me an 875, if I could take the 875 key work and stick it on a Mark 6 or even a 7, I'd be happy. So here we go. Irrational fantasy for your old sax. One, it fits like a glove. The 7, the table keys. Once you learn, if you keep your fingers in the middle of the table keys, you're fine. If you try to use the extreme of the table keys, you have to move your finger around a lot. But the best pivot point is actually right smack in the middle. And then it's just like the 6 at that point. But then the pivot, the length of the pivot arm is different, and it's just a different feel. And really the 7 seems a little bit more clunky, requiring a heavier hand just to push the keys down. GB, a new instrument must be played, replayed, or dressed like an old pipe in order to have a personality, show its value or its weaknesses. And that's one thing I do. When I always test instruments, I always have one come in and I'll play a particular piece, like concerto, really, for about 10 minutes to see if it's playable, good playable. Get an idea of what it feels like and what the player likes. Then at the end, I would play through a complete concerto once or twice, tweaking things as I went on. See, the mouthpiece, reed, and a good mouthpiece are essential, and it certainly is important to the sax. Finally, in jazz, you can have best saxophone mouthpiece reach technique of the instrument. Talent in jazz saxophones remains the essential power of creativity. Many prefer the balanced action, like Lester Young and Illinois Jacquet. Zoot Sims. He plays old cigar cutter. The Mark 7 had a major significant advance in the quality of the sax, but also has weaknesses and didn't have the career of the older Mark 6. And the competitors made enormous progress. Like I mentioned, Yamaha. That's one of the biggest competitors at that time. Yamaha just went from a small to a big saxophone company. Perfectly tuned sax and have a flat sound without personality. This is kind of like if you ever played piano. I used to play piano. I used to judge piano competitions. I used to tune pianos. In pianos, you don't have just one string of each note. You have multiple strings. And what you do is you don't tune, say you got 3 strings on a low C, you don't tune all 3 strings perfectly in tune. Otherwise, they just go ding. You make them slightly out of tune, so you get a nice wavering full sound from that. And having, as I mentioned, your perfectly tuned sax and a flat sound, you want it perfectly in tune when you're playing with the orchestra and stuff. But as a jazz musician, you want flexibility, and you play the way you want to. See, you need to know your target audience. Orchestras, brass bands, conservatories, saxophones, for everybody. So Selmer used his skills and professionalism, or fuzzy perfectionist character, and that's how the SuperAction 80 eventually began. The Mark 7 says was a magnificent, expensive sax with a technical evolution and the constant improvement of quality of all the instruments showed more and more of its small defects. Hence the new SuperAction 80. More balanced in different ranges with a wider emissions, and more homogeneous with better clogging the buffers to avoid micro leaks. Better sealing of the pads to avoid micro leaks and give easier, more accurate bass. The more stamped sound made it easier to find suitable reeds, but his role as a 7 tester evolved into that of technical advisor when they designed the SuperAction 80 model. Now, I haven't done a full evaluation of SuperAction 80. I've only had one for a short time, but I swear it seemed to have the same size tone holes for the most part as a Mark 7. They revised the keywork a bit, made it more six-ish per se. But I really thought it was kind of the same. Just that, and I think smaller ribs also. Requests to play rock, rhythm, blues, pop, etc. And more studios wanted perfect intonation. Of course, why not? Everyone does. SuperAction 80. If I had the money, I'd have one of every model. of every year. Why be greedy, right? What's the role of SuperAction 80? What's the reason for creation? Basically, the disaffection of Mark 7. I remember back then too, and I remember people did not like the 7. A lot of people were selling their 7s and going back to 6s. But the alto players, the classical alto players of the universities around here liked the 7's darker tone over the 6s. And that's from the thicker ribs and everything, made it give it a darker tone. But the tenor players, they just didn't like the 7. There's too many variables in it, like I mentioned before. And they went back to 6s. It's kind of funny. I remember classifieds in the newspapers back then. They had Mark 4s, Mark 5s, Mark 6s, Mark 7s, Mark 8s, typos. So we go on here. He likes to play with new models, and he's happy with his old Mark 6. The SuperAction Series 2, produced in '86, brings further innovations. Left-hand high F control spatula, new right-hand high F sharp key, pointed screws with a backlash spring. Those are those screws that supposedly keep the pivot screws consistent. And I have pictures of that on my website. Improved texture pads with riveted resonators. Body breech assembly ferrule with O-ring. Oh, that's with the body tube to the lower bow has an O-ring in there. That's right. Is offered the harmonic key option. Remember those harmonic keys too. I should do a video about those. It's clear that according to the morphology instruments, the style of music, people like it even better. A lot of people like the series too. I kind of like the original series, but a lot of people they go back to what they know best, and what I know best was the 6-7 SuperAction 80. He goes on, same for beaks or mouthpieces. I practically always kept the same instrument with the same mouthpiece, whatever the context in the studio, in a small formation, big band, or concert. Whereas like Eddie Daniels, John Coltrane, constantly changing mouthpieces. And read the Auto Link one. I forgot who it was. I think it was Coltrane, had a bag of mouthpieces, like 50 mouthpieces or something. Or is that 50 reeds you practice with from one practice? Amazing. And what's the next question? Perfect saxophone mouthpiece read is requested by every saxophonist. Miracle mouthpiece. Of course, it helps that the body pip is correct too. The instrument result, the combination, why it would never be perfect. The morphologies of the saxophonist, their mouthpieces, reeds, style of playing. There was a saxophonist I knew before. We had this me and a friend of mine who's a mouthpiece person. He finishes mouthpieces for people, and he's really known well. We had a Cotterworth alto that was Leak City. Neither of us could play it. This other player was in town, and he played it, and he was able to have it play top to bottom without a problem. But he just blew the wazoo out of it. Just a loud player, brash player. He was able to play it. And whereas we were more, I don't want to say stylistic, we're more classical like. We're looking for, really light dynamics, really extreme dynamics. And he was more like super loud. He's in a band on stage, he plays super loud. And everyone's, let's see, going on, everyone wants to play faster and faster, have technique. That's the mechanism importance. Choice of reeds, more in tune, unmarked recordings, electronic measuring devices, etc. Precise sound, quality of timbre for classical musicians. Lee Konitz, Paul Desmond were a big influence on this clean and precise game. Speakers, actors, singers, etc. Microphones are there. The 7 suffered from this development, which is certain is that 6 months of treatment between a rocker who plays all fortissimo and a classic who works on his spun sounds or new sax will no longer be the same. The metal plays and the tone will be different. Mouthpiece and reed obviously equal. That's why before buying a secondhand sax, you have to know who played with it, or else have the talent of Charlie Parker and play on anything and yet invent brilliant improvisations. Well, I'm not quite sure what he's getting at, but I mean, you have players who really squeeze hard on the keywork and they really indent the pads. When you indent the pads, you're also stretching the skin. When you stretch the skin, you're creating micro leaks, potentially. A lot of things there. That's why you always want to repad something when you buy something. When something's so expensive, like a Selmer Paris saxophone, if you get a used one, you'll probably want to get it just refurbished. Did you want to keep your saxes and mouthpieces as a musician during your long career? I would love to have every horn I've ever played. Do you collect non-standard saxophones because of your function as an estayer at Selmer? See, he goes, not at all. He played dozens of saxes that he sold. Well, he played every instrument off the assembly line. I wouldn't want to keep all of them either. Maybe a few here and there. He started with the 6, then the 7, and the only one he kept was the 7. Then he played several SuperAction 80s. Collecting instruments is not his cup of tea. Interesting. Okay, so he dedicated, recorded, and Debussy revisited by a vision as a jazz man. Plays a living, always been jazz. He started with the clarinet. That's interesting. American jazz clarinets, Benny Goodman, Buddy DeFranco, Tony Scott, etc. He started with the clarinet and began with the New Orleans Orchestra of Michel at tenor. He dies at Beckett, Bigard, then Goodman, Hamilton, later Gouffre. He played with Beckett in 1954. Look at that. After playing in a little alto, he adopted the tenor. The one who impressed me the most on the clarinet and still impressed me is Eddie Daniels. Met him in 78, since they were neighbors in New York. What is your opinion of the French saxophone mouthpiece, or bill as they call it, I guess? What do you think of the other S1, S2, S3 saxophones and Buffet Crampon? American Japanese saxophones, let's see. Selmer, Buffet Crampon, LeBlanc, Cousinon, Dolnay fought with the Americans King, Khan, Yamaha, and Yangasawa. As I mentioned, I really like the Yamaha original 875s. They just had a better, more Selmer-ish tone than the later 875s. Let's see. Subjective, latest tests. He's retired now, but he likes the 6 and the 7 and the SuperAction 80, since those were his main subjects he played on. And that's it. Thank to Gerard Badini for his time he gave in this article right here. And I'll give a link to this article in the description, so you can look at all these cool YouTube videos, which I can't play because YouTube will mark my video as copyright infringement for his music. Anyways, if you like this, give a like, subscribe, and share. For more information about the 6, 7, and SuperAction 80. Don't forget to check my links at the end of this video too for more information about them. And there he is with the saxophone. And his auto link, 9-star. Thank you very much. We'll see you later.